Hi everyone, today we are going to talk about contemporary art worldwide. I am basing this lecture off of chapter 32 from the 16th edition of Gardner's Art Through the Ages. I didn't include any stars in this lecture, but it's a pretty short one, so if you are accompanying this with the study guide, it shouldn't be any problem to stay on board with what we're about to cover. Let's start with exploring what the word contemporary means. So it's broken down here into two parts. We've got con and tempus. Con means together with, or we could even say same, and tempus means time in Latin. So contemporary art, when we talk about contemporary art, we're talking about art that is happening at the same time as we are happening. In other words, art right now. You'll see that a common theme in this chapter of the textbook is that a lot of the art is socio-political. Socio-political, when you break it down into two separate parts, means it has to do with society and or it has to do with politics. This makes a lot of sense since all art, in its own way, is already socio-political, which is to say that it conveys a message and it also presents a perspective. You can't make a piece of art without it having some kind of socio-political implication. And one of the beauties of contemporary art is that, thanks to modern technology, a lot of us are able to make art where it was maybe less accessible to do that in the past. And it's also much more accessible to consume art, whether it be through the internet or going to galleries. Now, all of a sudden, all of us have access to art if we want it. So it makes sense that as a mirror of contemporary society, a lot of artwork is talking about issues that we all deal with on a daily basis. I tossed in this image here on the left of an artwork by Shireen Nishat. It's a pretty provocative image that's about the role of women in Islamic society after the revolution. I want to address one thing that I think a lot of people kind of complain about when they think about or talk about contemporary art, which is they say, I don't get it. Like, it's like all this like weird stuff in a gallery, it's like some trash on the floor, and it's true that contemporary art can be that. But the beauty of art right now is that we get to choose whatever kind of medium we want to work in. And there are plenty of artists out there who are still making traditional paintings and sculptures. If that's your kind of thing, you can definitely find that. Of course, it's contemporary, so there's often a twist. I've started out the lecture here with some paintings by Jenny Saville. These are oil on canvas paintings, and you can see with this picture of a person staring at the paintings, her work is typically really big. It's working with a format that we've seen a ton of already in this class. It's like women, some of them are naked, they're big, paintings, and they're oil on canvas. But you can see how she's taking all of our expectations of that traditional format and turning it over onto its head. Kehinde Wiley is working in a very similar way. His work is often really big. This painting on the left is 9 feet by 9 feet, and it's based off of a famous historical painting of Napoleon. But you can see that he's subverted it by painting a black person wearing like contemporary hip clothing that we can all recognize. And he's turned the background into sort of like a flat field of like beautiful decorative gold, essentially using all of those old ways of working. So, the gilded frame, the big oil painting, all of these things that we typically associate with white aristocratic culture, and subverting it and making it his own. I've also tossed into here a picture of Kehinde Wiley on the left with Obama at the unveiling of the presidential portrait that he made of Obama. And one thing that's cool about contemporary art is that you can often follow how art is mirroring political events, and you can learn about the artist in real time, which is something that we don't really get with a lot of the historical artwork we were looking at. The first two artists that I showed you were doing paintings that explored political identity. I've put into here Robert Mapplethorpe, who is creating images that are often very similar to things that we might expect to see painted. But his work is his most famous work is photographic, and it focuses a lot on being a gay man in the 70s and 80s in the US, and sort of mirrors the AIDS crisis because he himself died of AIDS. And you can't look at his work without being aware of those political issues. One term that you'll see on your quiz is conceptual art. So, what is it? Well, concept, the word concept, is just a fancy word for idea. So, in conceptual artwork, the idea is the most important part of the art. A conceptual artwork is any artwork that the artist has made to explore and or express an idea. It can be made in any medium. It can look like anything. So it's not bound to being a sculpture or a painting in a traditional sense. A conceptual artist might not even wind up making objects. Perhaps they just perform in order to express their ideas, or I've put in this example on the left of a offset print, which is essentially a poster that the Guerrilla Girls, which was a group of artists working in the 80s, 90s, and they still do some stuff today, put out. You can see that in this example here on the left, this poster is explaining some of the quote-unquote advantages of being a woman artist. Things like working without the pressure of success, meaning you're not going to be successful, so don't worry about it. And not having to be in shows with men, which, if you think about it, most museums are full of artworks that were made by men. So she's saying, if you're a woman, you're not, chances are you're not going to be in a museum. So the most important part of this artwork is conveying all of these ideas. An example of some more artworks that are driven by concept. We have work here by Barbara Kruger. And if this work looks like a lot like the graphic design of the brand Supreme, it's because Supreme was directly influenced by her work. So you can see already there's a sort of like a straight shot pipeline between contemporary artwork and contemporary culture. In these two examples, Barbara Kruger is thinking about capitalism and about feminism. So on the one on the left, you've got a traditional sculpture. It says, "Your gaze hits the side of my face." With an emphasis on hits, like looking at me and treating me like an object. By doing that, you're dehumanizing me, and you're also removing the role of women from art, except as sculptures and paintings made by men. And on the right, well, I think you get that one, right? A direct comment on capitalism. Here are some artworks by Cara May Weems. So in this series of paintings that all center around a kitchen table, she performed various roles of different aspects of what it meant to her to be a black woman in American society. In the final exhibition of this artwork, she included in between each picture panels with explanations of what was going on, just to give even more of a context. So she was working with the concept of what her identity and her experience of life meant, and then working in the modes of text and photography to convey that to an audience. And also performance, since she was performing different roles. I just wanted to emphasize, and you're going to see this even more as we keep going, that contemporary art often drags in a ton of different stuff and shakes it all up to create artworks that combine different ways of working much more than we have seen in the past, which was like often, oh, this is a sculpture, this is a painting. Contemporary artwork has really expanded that and challenged that notion. Here is a term you gotta know: installation art. Installation art refers to the act of installing artwork. Installing in this case means the act of putting the artwork, the final artwork, into a place. Oftentimes, installation artwork occupies an entire room or gallery space. In order for you to really understand an installation artwork, you kind of got to be there to like walk around it and get a sense of how big it is and see what it feels like to be in this space with it. Oftentimes, often but not always, it'll have aspect of like lighting or sound so that you feel like you're really immersed when you're there. This is really important, what I'm about to say, so get ready for it. What makes installation art different from sculpture or quote unquote traditional art is that it's a complete and unified experience instead of just a display of separate individual artworks. So you're not like going into the gallery to look at a single object, you're going into the gallery to experience this whole big thing. And as an example, I've put in this artwork by Kai Guo-jiang from 2013. In it, you see 99 actual life-size replicas of animals. They're resin with fur on them, fake fur, and they're all drinking from the same like big pond of water. There's a drip mechanism, so if you were to actually go into the gallery and see this, you would hear water, and they're standing on sand. So when you were immersed in the installation, you would have this incredible experience of feeling like these animals were almost alive because you got the sand, they're super big, you're hearing things. It's about an immersive experience. Here's another example of installation artwork. This is the work of Tara Donovan. And when you first enter this room, you could imagine it looks like you're seeing a cloud, weird cloud shape coming down from the top of the room, aka the ceiling. And it's lit from inside, so it's kind of glowing. When you look at it close up, this is literally made of just two things, which is styrofoam cups and hot glue. It's so cool that she uses everyday objects, things that we take for granted, and is turning them into something that's like bizarre and otherworldly and really exciting. So another thing contemporary artists often do, one could say, is challenge the notions of what kind of materials are needed to make art. Let's talk about this word abstraction, because it's something that we often associate with contemporary art. But really, abstraction is something that's been present with art since the beginning of time. Like if you think about cave paintings, those are pretty abstract. So what does abstraction mean? Well, when working in abstraction or making an abstract artwork, an artist has either removed, which is to say abstracted elements from an object, or changed the idea of the object somehow to make it a more simplified or abstracted form. Abstraction isn't an art movement, but a lot of art movements contain abstraction, which is what I was just saying before. And when abstracting something, an artist might have a real object in mind when making the artwork, but the end result will be stylized or distorted or exaggerated. An idea or an example of abstraction that I really like to use is, for example, Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse is super abstracted. The maker, Disney, started with the idea of a mouse, but then he turned it into this completely exaggerated, distorted thing. Like if you were an alien and you were looking at a real mouse and Mickey Mouse, you might be like, I don't get it. There's no connection. But as humans, we can use our like mind and our understanding of artwork to look at something like Mickey Mouse and say, oh, that's a mouse, or to look at like you know SpongeBob and say, oh, that's a kitchen sponge, right? They're both abstracted to an extreme. In this example on the left, we have an image of an artwork by Yayoi Kusama called All the Eternal Love I Have for Pumpkins. And you can see that she's taken a pumpkin and abstracted it like over and over, making all of these abstracted pumpkin objects and then put them in an installation space that has mirrors to make it look like it goes on forever and ever. Here is some more work by Yayoi Kusama. She's really cool. She's Japanese, and her artwork is pretty consistently abstracted in super bright colors. Often takes the form of installations that are immersive, meaning that you're like, when you're in there, you feel just completely encompassed by them. There she is laying on a bunch of her pillows. She's really into polka dots. And there's often this kind of like, there's this strong idea of this recurrent inner world that she has. And it's like she spent her whole life trying to bring this vision to the entire world. She's also partnered to create like fashion lines, and she's written books. So she works across media in a pretty interesting, exciting way, and just seems like a pretty cool character. We talked about installation artwork. Another word that you'll often hear associated with installation artwork is site-specific art. So a site-specific work of art is designed for a specific location. If it's removed from that location, it loses all or most of its meaning. So for example, this example on the left, this is an aerial view of islands outside of Miami, Florida. And you can see that the artists literally surrounded these islands with pink fabric. So in order to make this artwork, which is very site specific, they had to measure the site, meaning the place, and see how much fabric it would take to make this darn thing. And you can imagine that if they took that fabric and tried to put it around some other islands, it wouldn't make sense. So it would lose all or most of its meaning, because these artists were interested in transforming this giant landscape into like an abstract painting, basically, by sort of like quote unquote painting around the islands with fabric. Now, a lot of installation artwork is site specific, but it doesn't have to be. I'm going to do a back scroll real quick, bear with me. So, like this artwork by Tara Donovan, it's an installation artwork, but you could put it into pretty much any gallery and it would be fine. So, this is not site specific. And neither is this, the 99 life-sized animals. Like you could put that in a different gallery and it would be fine. But you try and put this somewhere else and it doesn't work because it's site specific. It's made specifically for a very specific place. Here are some other examples of site specific artworks. This is Doris Salcido's work. She's Colombian, and she works primarily with political issues. So on the left here you see her work Shibboleth, which is in the Tate Modern in London. And the work is this floor with the crack in it. And the crack could represent many different things, very like open-ended, but it's essentially about like fissure and a breakdown of relations, and it's very political. And on the right, Also, this same artist, you see another very site-specific artwork. This is 1,550 wooden chairs that have been installed in Istanbul. So if you took those chairs and you know, put them, I don't know what, in the street in front of the place where you live, it would just look like a mess. But here you can see it's like been very intentionally placed. It's very site specific. Often when thinking about site specific installation, all those ideas and stuff, um, all of that is also applied to contemporary architecture. I've got two more images here. So we've got before the end of the lecture, that is. So I've got this image, which is the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., which was made by Maya Lin in the 80s. Received a lot of feedback about it when it was made. Um, a lot of people thought that it was potentially disrespectful because it was such a quiet artwork. If you look at it from a different angle, you almost can't see it because it's just like a cut in the earth. Maya Lin made a lot of very intentional choices when making this artwork. I'm going to read you just like a super brief quote from her in her own words. The Vietnam Veterans, this is the quote. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial is not an object inserted into the earth, but a work formed from the act of cutting open the earth and polishing the earth's surface, dematerializing the stone to pure surface, creating an interface between the world of the light and the quieter world beyond the names. End quote. So when you think about that quote, and you can imagine walking down to engage with the names that are polished on the black stone, you can imagine how it is literally like entering the earth. It's also a little bit like going down into a grave because this memorializes the dead. And the polished stone is like a mirror. So as you're looking at the names, you're also seeing yourself reflected and thinking about how you're implicated with this tragedy. And then just an image of some contemporary architecture. This is an example of a building by Frank Gehry, who's one of the most famous living architects. And he's famous for really thoroughly exploring the idea of deconstructivism in architecture. Deconstructivism being the upending of all the traditional rules of architecture. So he seeks harmony and beauty in space, which is what most architecture does, but he kind of takes all of the conventions of architecture and turns them over on their head. In this example of the museum in Bilbao, Spain, the Guggenheim Museum, you can see that there's hardly any straight lines and flat surfaces, which is what we associate commonly with buildings. Everything is curved and undulating, and you can see in this image looking up when you're inside that it sort of feels like the building is churning, like it's alive. So deconstructivism takes all of the traditional ideas of what architecture is and has got to be and just tosses them out the window. So there's so much more I could say, but that concludes this lecture. Just a brief intro to some ideas about contemporary art. Thanks. Bye.